right now on the line, Odyssey NFL insider Peter King joining us here as he does every week on Willard and Dibs. Hello, Peter.
What's up, guys? How are you?
Well, not as good as we were last week because that was when our football team was undefeated, and now it's not. But I loved a bunch of stuff that you said in the column specific to this one. Let's start with what Jim Schwartz did, and do you think this is something that is repeatable by other defensive coordinators around the league?
Yeah, if they trade for Myles Garrett this week, here's how I sort of look at this game. The first conversation, the first issue that we'd be talking about if Jake Moody made a kick that he's probably made 95 out of 100 times in his life, and I'm exaggerating, maybe it's 88 out of 100 times, I don't know, but it's an easy kick for a professional kicker. It's an easy kick for a Division II college kicker. So, again, this is a game that the 49ers should have said, okay, we didn't play that well. We got guys hurt, and it was a really tough road game, but we survived. And in the NFL, it's about survive and advance. And so that's why, in my opinion, this game reminds me a lot of the Kansas City-Detroit game, to lead off this season, where if you watch that game, you say, Kansas City handed that game to them. And, hey, you give Detroit a lot of credit for winning that game, and you give Cleveland credit for winning the game the other day with a third-string quarterback. So that's great. But does anybody believe that on a neutral field in Wichita that Cleveland wins against San Francisco more than one or maybe two times out of 10? I don't. Which is why I think you have to, at this time of year in the NFL, you have to basically say, listen, you're not going to win them all. There's only been one team in the modern history of football that's won them all, and that was Miami 51 years ago. Now, having said all that, the things I would take out of this game that I think we talked about this last week, here's the thing about a physical offensive team that I think you have to keep in mind. It's a 17-week season, and Christian McCaffrey gets in 20 car crashes every week. And you have to ask yourself, okay, do we need to try to limit that in some way? Do we need to either call things that are different, or do we need to just say, we are going to run this guy as hard as we can for as long as we can, and let's just play? And if he can't play, he can't play, and we'll deal with that when it happens. Or do you start to make accommodations, for people like Deebo Samuel? And look, Deebo Samuel basically was hurt, according to Kyle Shanahan, on the first play of the game. And, so he was missing in action for basically the entire game. Christian McCaffrey was missing in action for at least 2 quarters. And so that's why I look at this game and I say, I'm not really disturbed about it too much at all, quite honestly. I think it's pretty natural that faced with everything that they were faced with, that they lost a very narrow game, and it's a great story that the third string quarterback of the Browns came in and won a game and all that. I get it, but I don't think it's all that meaningful myself.
Peter King here on 95.7 The Game, especially as you mentioned, if Jake Moody makes a 41-yarder, which is kind of like a Steph Curry free throw, we're looking at the game a little bit differently. You mentioned the physical nature of the Niners. Do they have the pitch in their arsenal to play more of a finesse game, for lack of a better way to describe it? Or is this just their identity, and whether it's McCaffrey or not, Shanahan's going to play with the fullback and the tight end and play smash mouth as much as he can?
I think this is their identity. But I think especially when you play a team like the Browns, who on a given day you could make the argument that this is the best team, best defense in football. And you look at Denzel Ward at corner, NFL Next Gen Stats has him right now as the best cover corner in football after 6 weeks. So it isn't just Myles Garrett you got to worry about. They got really good players all over this team. So I think I would look at that for part of the equation. But I also think, and we've talked about this, I also think that I think you have to ask yourself, especially if this is your calling card. And look, John Lynch told me this in training camp, that they decided early on, he and Kyle Shanahan decided early on in their tenures, whether it was 17, 18, certainly no later than 18, that the way the NFL was going right now, that you're better off having physical guys who have some speed than you are having really, really fast guys who are not that physical. Now, you could say, well, geez, what about Miami? Look at Miami. Look what they're doing. And I understand you saying that about Miami. But Miami is, to me, the exception to what is becoming the rule in the NFL, where there's an awful lot of physical, great wide receivers in this game. DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, we could name 20 of them right now. But I think that is a better way to build your team in the NFL right now. And look, you just tell me if at the end of this year, we're entering week 7, Tyreek Hill has shown that he is, that he sometimes gets nicked up, and it's hard for sprinters to stay on the field all the time. And look, Tyreek Hill is also a tough guy, don't get me wrong, but he's not built like Deebo Samuel. And so I just think that the 49ers way of doing business is good and it's smart. And I would, if I were running the show, I might at least make a suggestion that that other guys start to get into the rotation a little bit more, because this is a 17-week odyssey, and you want to make sure that those guys are going to be healthy as long as they can be.
Peter King with us here on Willard and Dibs. Peter, it's such an interesting sort of an idea or a thought, because this is the second time that we've spoken specifically, for example, about Deebo Samuel. So let me just ask it this way. You're talking about the benefit of that physicality, but is it realistic for the Niners to play the way they do and be healthy at the end of the year?
Probably not. And that's why you have to make a decision. Do you just want to have them play the way they play and take your chances on staying healthy through the year? Or do you want to actually try to do it a different way? And do you want to maybe call different routes for guys like Deebo Samuel occasionally to maybe keep them away from the middle of the field a little bit more than you do right now? And look, if I mean, far be it from me to question Kyle Shanahan and what it is that they do on offense. I think he is a brilliant mind at this sport and at exactly what he does. But and I'm not saying I'd love to at least have a discussion about it if I were Kyle Shanahan and if I were the guys on that offensive staff, just because I don't know that it is sustainable, not just this year, but over a number of years, to have the number of car crashes that those guys have. But, again, I don't sit here and say they're doing it wrong. I sit here and say, I'd love to at least have a discussion about it.
And it seems curious to me that more teams don't emulate what he does, and perhaps it's because what you're talking about, Peter, because of the toll it takes on a roster. And with a quarterback like Brock Purdy, who we all agree has been terrific to start his career, does he have the ability and the wherewithal to go out there and play in a 3 and 4 wide receiver set, or is he better suited to play in this sort of controlled Shanahan offense?
That's a great question. That is really a good question. I think the Niners would say, and Kyle Shanahan would say, well, geez, he started 46 games in college at a high level, and he has played against all kinds of defenses, and he's played with several different schemes, on offense. So he should be able to play any way you want him to play. But I think it's obvious to me that he's probably better in the classic old pro style set. He's probably better when he has Kyle Juszczyk in the backfield with him, either as a sidecar or, as a protector. However, I think, and we talked about this last week, what I find really interesting about what we saw last week in Brock Purdy is that he became the first player in at least 8 years, to throw 4 touchdown passes in the same game, all outside the tackle box. And for people who say, well, what does that mean exactly? What it means is that he was either flushed or voluntarily got out of the pocket. I mean, obviously it's all voluntary, but he was either flushed or he decided himself to get out of the pocket, and he made plays on the move 4 different times that resulted in touchdown passes. And that, to me, says a lot about your quarterback and his ability to play either, in a classic pro-style way where you're in the pocket, or because clearly he has shown time and again that he's okay with getting hit. He knows that that's part of the game. Or he's fine with going out of the pocket and making throws on the run. And so I don't think, and again, I don't think Sunday's game, raises the kind of red flags about Brock Purdy that I say, oh boy, somebody now has finally figured out how to, be the kryptonite for Brock Purdy. I don't know a lot of quarterbacks in football who, against pressure, the way that the Browns regularly, down after down after down, pressured the pocket. And also with, a not 100% left tackle playing against Myles Garrett, and without your 2 most important offensive weapons for much of the game. How many quarterbacks are winning that game? Not a lot of them.
Yeah, Peter, I saw at the very end of your article that you are having to fend off a few people who are already on you for, I don't want to say your Brock Purdy fandom, but simply your Brock Purdy compliments, your assessment. What word would you use there?
There are a lot of people who judge quarterbacks numerically and analytically, who I think are still questioning Brock Purdy. Obviously we talked about, we must have talked about it at some point, about the Ringer rankings of quarterbacks having Brock Purdy down in the 20s.
Yep.
And, a lot of people who basically judge simple play-by-play with skills, with his arm strength, with his speed, with all that, are going to judge guys, many quarterbacks, they're going to judge other quarterbacks to be better than Brock Purdy. My only feeling about all that is very, very simple. Watch the games. And I don't know how you watch the game against Dallas, where, by the way, he was protected, but not he got chased around. I mean, that was Dallas came into that game with a very good defense and chased him around some, and he answered every question that was had of him that game. So again, look, time will tell. Other people could well be right about him. I could be wrong about him. And I'm not saying right now that Brock Purdy is going to be a great player in the NFL. I don't know that he's going to be a great player. The only thing I know is based on what we've seen in 14 games in which he has played at least 3/4 of every game of those 14 games. He's 13-1, and he had one absolute clunker, and that was the game this past Sunday. So if, I'm certainly not going to throw him out, with the garbage after having one bad game. I mean, Justin Herbert is a great player. Justin Herbert was awful last night. And quarterbacks sometimes are awful. The only guy who's never really awful is Patrick Mahomes. He has some subpar games, but you tell me, you show me one game in his career where he's been awful. I don't know that there's been one.
Yeah, Niner fans wishes that he was awful in the Super Bowl, but he wasn't, and he came through late in that victory. Monday night, Peter, is the Kyle Shanahan Man Crush Bowl. Kirk Cousins against.
That's outstanding.
Thank you. I'm kind of borrowing from your column because you highlighted it as one of the games of the week. Does Kyle try to maybe show out a little bit with Brock Purdy under center to kind of show Kirk that he actually found the Kirk 2.0?
I don't think he's going to think about it for 5 minutes. I really don't. I think he's going to hug Kirk Cousins before the game, tell him that he wishes him absolutely all the best in the world except for the next 3 hours, and let's be in touch. Kyle Shanahan loves Kirk Cousins. When they were together in Washington, Kirk Cousins made some beautiful music. So it wasn't all that long a period of time, but he really likes the guy. And look, I think the only thing that Kyle Shanahan right now, I'm not saying he's grateful for it, but, he is now seeing a quarterback who can play really the way he wants them to play in Brock Purdy. He wants the way he wants his quarterback to play. And he's got a guy on his team who makes 139th what Kirk Cousins makes. And we can all laugh about that and say, oh, that's a funny statistic and all that stuff. But it means something, because for the next 2 years, the San Francisco 49ers are going to be able to build a roster. You think they would have been able to sign Javon Hargrave if Kirk Cousins were their quarterback right now? No, they wouldn't have had a chance. So the good thing about having Brock Purdy for the next 2 years at least is going to be that they're going to be able to afford him, clearly, and they're going to be able to afford a lot of other things that with a $35 or $40 million quarterback they wouldn't be able to afford.
Peter King with us here, Willard and Dibs, every week, 95.7 The Game. All right, we've gotten through a lot on this game, Peter, but that now allows us to get to this. And I want to read something straight from your column to our listeners because it's going to make them all pump their fist in their car or next to their smart speaker, wherever they are. You write, I think I will never understand if I see the replay 64 more times how the officials didn't call a fumble on P.J. Walker on an intentional grounding call late in the first half, deep in Cleveland territory, probably cost San Francisco a field goal, might have cost San Francisco the game. Two things on officials in this game, Peter. A, what happened there? And B, on that Tashaun Gibson hit late in the game, if that's reviewable in college, why can't it be reviewable in the NFL?
Well, Bill Belichick has a great point. He said, look, if we're going to have 2 challenges per game, let us challenge what we want. I totally agree. Brian Daboll in the last play of Sunday football would have gotten an interference call when the cornerback had a firm hold of his tight end's jersey, and so you're going to be preaching to some in the choir about that, okay? But I also think that when we're talking about the P.J. Walker play, The P.J. Walker play bothers me because, in my opinion, the officials are assuming, based on his arm motion after the ball came free, that he intended to throw the ball away, and so they called intentional grounding. Okay? The official's job is not to read a player's mind, okay? Because clearly P.J. Walker had the presence of mind that he wanted just to throw the ball forward, because then he would risk not getting an intentional grounding call, and he would only then have an incomplete pass. But to me, the ball was loose before the arm motion was coming forward to make it an incomplete pass. That's the thing that bothered me about that call. And look, you might say, well, a lot of football happened after that. Yeah, it did. But you know what? It cost the 49ers either 3 or 7 points, period. And so all calls matter. All calls should be adjudicated like it's the 7th game of the World Series. All calls can determine the outcome of the game whenever they happen. And in my opinion, this call was not called correctly by that crew.
Peter, I agree with you. Very, very much so. And I think you're getting a lot of nods of heads around the Bay Area right now. Great stuff as always, Peter. We thank you so much, and we will talk to you again next week.
Sounds great, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Peter.
There it is. Peter King, Odyssey NFL Insider, joining us here on Willard and Dibs. There's a lot that came out of that conversation, but for me, the number one thing I noticed, your performance in that interview was absolutely off the charts.
Thank you, Mark. And,
unbelievable performance.
I currently have my speechwriter preparing an acceptance speech.
Wow.
I've got goosebumps.
It wasn't just a great question. He followed it up by saying that's a really good question. It was double-barreled. You made him laugh. You didn't make him cry, although that's not what we're looking for.
No.
I tell you what, man, salute. That was just well done across the board.
Mark, thank you.
Congratulations.
I want to apologize to the YouTube audience because I ripped off my sweatshirt in celebration.
I was going to get to the butt.
And
it was always a butt.
Well, the butt actually wasn't what was shown, but the belly did fly for a moment there because the sweatshirt came off and the T-shirt went up. And I know you got you got probably more than you wanted. I know that HR has already been summoned and contacted, but right now, until we go to break, I'm on top of the world, and I'm afraid that this may be my last segment.
Well, good thing is we're going to break.